Your moderator for today is Dr. Muhammad Raza Kazmi. Dr. Kazmi holds a doctorate degree from the University of Karachi. He was formerly president, Pakistan College Teachers Association, and he writes in both Urdu and English. His recent publications include The Blood of Hussein, A Concise History of Pakistan, and in Urdu, Tehzeeb-o-Takhliq, which is a work on literary criticism. I now hand this session over to Dr. Muhammad Raza Kazmi.
Anatol Levin tell us that Pakistan is going to survive, and just about a few minutes before in the ballroom, Sarmila Bose was telling us that it won't, and she also added that 1947 was a mistake. So we'll really look back at 1947 and try to see what went wrong, and we'll have an open discussion. I think we'll have uneven divisions for our discussion. First, we'll talk about the two-nation theory and the various people who have given expression to it. Then we'll have a discussion on whether the partition of the country or the partition of the provinces was responsible for the riots of 1947. And finally, we'll try to find out ways to reverse the marginalization of Pakistani Hindus. So, first of all, I want to say that rethinking is taking place on both sides of the border. Here in Pakistan, we are getting calls for excluding the two-nation theory from our curricula, Pakistan studies, history, whatever concerned. Next, in the name of Pakistan studies, I saw Dr. Mubarak Ali, the author of this article, sitting here. Wonder if he's here. There we can stop for a minute. And there's rethinking from the Indian side as well, because we see a number of books on the founder of Pakistan coming out of India. Now, next, Jaswant Singh book is the 11th book on Jinnah to be written by an Indian, and B.R. Nanda's book is the 12th. Now it comes back again to the two-nation theory. Now the two-nation theory, well, I'm sorry, I've been remiss. I've not been introducing my participants, very distinguished participants, and I'll begin with our former Minister of Education, Dr. Hamida Kuro. She really needs no introduction. I'll just say one word, that she resigned her position as Professor of History in the University of Karachi because of atrocities committed in East Pakistan. Then we have Dr. Yasmin Khan, the acclaimed author of The Great Partition, The Making of India and Pakistan, Yale University Press. Her book received a very good review from A.R. Siddiqui, who was in the previous session with Sarmila Bose. Dr. Syed Jafar Ahmed is the author of Federalism in Pakistan and many other books, and he is the director since 1996 of the Pakistan Studies Center, University of Karachi, and I think we have Mr. Alok Bhalla, Dr. Alok Bhalla, who written The Social History of England in the 19th Century, Stories about the Partition of India and Partition Dialogues. Mr. Asif Noorani is a veteran journalist. He co-authored with Kuldeep Nayyar Tales of Two Cities, not just a tribute to Charles Dickens on his bicentennial. It is about Mumbai, where he and I were born, and about Lahore, where Kuldeep Nayyar was born. Now, next please. I am giving on the screen a detailed introduction of all the participants. We have to save time for the question and answer, so I've just given one-line introductions. There you can see on the screen that we have detailed, and we can give printouts also when wanted. Now at the heart now at the heart of the whole retrospection is the validity of the two-nation theory. Let us see therefore how and when this was expressed by the leaders of the Indian struggle. 1. Mahatma Gandhi. Every community is entitled, indeed bound to organize itself if it is to live as a separate entity. Young India, 6 January 1924. Sir Muhammad Iqbal. I have no doubt that if a federal government is established, Muslim federal states will willingly agree for purposes of India's defense to the creation of a neutral Indian military and naval forces. Indeed, in the time of Akbar, the Indian frontier was on the whole defended by armies officered by Hindu generals. Paragraph 7E of his presidential address at Allahabad, 1930. M.A. Jinnah, well, we all know this one. We are a nation with our own distinctive culture and civilization, language and literature, art and architecture, names and nomenclature. 17th September 1944. It's written Bombay, but I think it's now Mumbai. Then finally, coming to what Sarmila Bose's topic was, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. There was no chance of the Hindus there, by that he meant Bengal, agreeing to put themselves under permanent Muslim domination. Next. Now, the first question, and I would like each participant to give a brief reply so we can get on to the next one. Question 1. Mahatma Gandhi, I'm summing up. Mahatma Gandhi said the majority must organize itself separately. Allama Iqbal said only the country and not the army should be divided. M.A. Jinnah, of course, gave the most resounding expression to separatism, and Pandit Nehru said that Hindus should not be under permanent subjugation of Muslims. Do these statements validate the two-nation theory? I begin with Dr. Hamida Kuro.
Moderator has kindly accepted that instead of asking us questions, which normally our wives do at home, we will be given time, 5 minutes each, not more, to express our views on the different aspects of partition. Is that correct? Thank you, Jafar.
Now, I'm not the moderator anymore. No, but I've given you the text.
चलिए कोई बात नहीं अब आप
I think by now it's absolutely clear and proved that two-nation theory is no longer valid and probably never has been. This was even when... Ji?
Sound is not good. Or should I give you this mic?
Well,
I'll hold.
that is
I'm
favorite.
That one is terrible.
She hasn't started yet.
Yes, with regard to the two-nation theory, can you hear me now? Okay. With regard to the two-nation theory, I think by now it's pretty clear and has been proved, and most people who think about it or study this issue realize and agree that it's no longer valid and probably never was. Because how could there possibly anybody have seriously held the theory that there could be two nations in a subcontinent which since the Muslims came in 711 at least, they had made a home, they had set the rules for even administration and the rule of this country. And with their coming 1300 years of living together, in fact, contributing hugely to the culture of the subcontinent. In fact, you could say that for 1,000 years it was the Muslims who laid down the rules and whose culture was even dominant, perhaps not dominant, but very influential in the subcontinent. How could you divide the subcontinent according to two nations when the line was not at all clear, and most villages, in most towns, the people lived together and hardly used any, okay, so there's this thing about not eating together and so on and so forth. But you must remember that for those 1,000 years, you don't hear of riots, you don't hear of massacres, you don't hear of the kind of things that happened in the 20th century. So, to say that there are two nations who can't live together, it's a totally untenable theory, in my opinion.
Well,
Okay.
if Dr. Kuro would allow me, that in light of what she had said, could she explain to the audience the movement for the separation of Sindh from Bombay presidency?
That was not separating the two nations. It was an administrative unit. Sindh had been self-governing, autonomous or independent for most of its history. It was only added to the Bombay in the middle of the 19th century as a convenience for the British who wanted to rule from Bombay. And as soon as there were elections, there was an administration, and there were local people who came to realize the disadvantages of this union with Bombay, they demanded separation and got it.
But you...
I'm a historian from London, and I don't feel really that I want to wade into a political debate in the contemporary moment about the two-nation theory, and it's very difficult for me to say yes or no, the two-nation theory was valid or not valid. I think that's not what I'm here to do. What I'm interested in is the process through which the two-nation theory and nationalisms in India and Pakistan became validated retrospectively after 1947, and the process with which something occurred in 1946, 1947, which was very unanticipated, which had massive consequences for so many people, but which wasn't actually determined by the nationalist movements that had preceded it. I think, I have a quote here from Mountbatten. He was interviewed after the 3rd of June plan had been announced by many journalists. And they asked him lots of different questions, all about the British departure, about procedural details, about India's membership of the Commonwealth. But only one journalist thought to ask the most important question of all, which was, do you foresee any mass transfer of population? And he said, personally, I don't see it. There are many physical and practical difficulties involved. Some measure of transfer may come about in a natural way. And similarly, there are so many people, so many quotes which suggest that the transfer of population which occurred was not anticipated, it was not planned, it was not organized. It was in fact not organized by the new states until September 1947, when in Punjab at least, they acquiesced to the movement of people. So my feeling is, and it's what I've set out in my book, is that the states that came into existence didn't reflect the nationalisms which occurred before that. They retrospectively built up new histories to validate and to justify what had occurred retrospectively, and that's what we have in museums and textbooks and so on now, and that's what we're dealing with in both countries. So I think the two-nation theory has played a role in that. But having said that, there were nationalisms among many different groups, many different subgroups, many different very strong differences of political opinion in 1940s, and I don't want to underestimate that, but I think we have to, as historians, reflect upon the processes through which these become institutionalized, become part of curriculum, become part of our national mythologies, in Britain also, and start to think about the actual realities for people on the ground in 1946 or 47, because I think things were much less clear-cut than retrospectively they have been presented to have been at that time.
Well, first of all, I would say that the topic we were supposed to address was partition, and two-nation theory constitutes only one aspect of the whole issue of partition. There are other issues also. Perhaps in the subsequent session I would be speaking about colonialism and historiography of colonialism, which is very lacking in Pakistan. But now that the issue has been raised in terms of two-nation theory, I would say that the problem with the one-nation theory or the two-nation theory is this, that all nationalist histories are very limited in scope and they are very selective. And I would refer to the saying of Eric Hobsbawm, famous Marxist historian, who said that we have had enough of nationalist historiography. It is about time we started studying the history of nationalism. So I would say that instead of becoming a part of the nationalist historiography and then try to explain what this nationalism is, it would be better that we come out of the whole phenomenon of nationalism and then study it more objectively. And if we do that, I would say that my impression as a student of history is this, that two-nation theory in the first place, Jinnah was concerned more about the notion of Muslim separatism, which perhaps he was trying to do in order to get better deal for the Muslim minority of India. And he wanted to have safeguards for the Muslim minority. It was at a much, much later stage when he talked about the two-nation theory. And there as well, I would say that Jinnah was in fact invoking a political device. Two-nation theory was not part of Iman for him. It was not a permanent category for Qaid-e-Azam. It was a political device through which he wanted to identify one community with the other in a given circumstance, in a given historical context. But right or wrong, after 1947 there is no validity of it. And Jinnah was the first to deny this. And in his 11th August 1947 speech, what he tried to do was to suggest that now that Pakistan has come into being, we are one nation and there is no place for two-nation theory in Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Amita Kuro would want one sentence more.
I want to remind you that the two-nation theory was first expounded not by Qaid-e-Azam nor by any other Muslim leader. If you remember, Mr.
Lajpat Rai.
Lala Lajpat Rai. Before that you quoted Gandhi, and there were some other also Congress leaders or Hindu leaders anyhow who repeated this and emphasized it. In fact, in my paper, which I'm not reading, I've also said that the whole question of partition of the country was much more advocated and pushed by the Congress leaders, particularly Nehru, because he wanted a socialist state with 5-year plans and control from the center. And he didn't want the Punjab and Bengal, which were objecting to that. They wanted to control their own destinies, and so he saw to it. In fact, I would say in cahoots with Mountbatten, that minimum amount, that all the lands which were majority Muslim should be given. You may remember that Qaid-e-Azam always demanded the whole of the Punjab and whole of this Bengal, so that there should be considerable minorities in whichever separate state there was, if there was going to be a separate state. But then those were all cut off and a smaller, truncated Pakistan was given.
I think we're all waiting to hear Dr. Alok Bhalla.
Thank you. I'm not a historian, so I won't get into the controversy of whether Gandhi said this or that. In any case, I don't know where that quotation comes from and at what time. I'm basically a literary critic, and my concern has been with looking at literary texts both prior to 1947 and subsequently. And what I find in almost all, I can say this without almost any hesitation whatsoever, that almost all literary criticism, all literary texts, whether written in Urdu, Punjabi, Hindi, Bengali, almost always think that the entire notion of the partition was an absurdity. That nobody, not a single writer, thinks that the relationships between Hindus and Muslims or Sikhs were so irreconcilable or so unbridgeable that odd moments of dispute or odd moments of debate could not be bridged through continuous discussion. It never was. It need not have been. So I think that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is that almost all fiction, all literary texts speak about the fact that that this entire, what happened in 1947 was completely inexplicable. And the fact that they say that is a blessing for us in some ways, because if they had said that it is explicable and that human beings needed to kill each other or they needed to force each other out of their homes, then we would have something seriously wrong with our moral sensibility. And it is precisely because the literary mind thought about the fact that human beings are in India and the Indian subcontinent were incapable of this kind of deep resentment and hate that gives us hope for the present and building new relationships. I also want to point out that almost no literary text think, I don't know about the historians say, the historians have their own different kinds of protocols. Their function, as she has already said, is to give a certain kind of retrospective intelligibility to a certain kind of series of events. It's not the job of the literary mind to do that. The literary mind is all the time looking for ways in which human beings deal with extremes of experience that they have had. Now, having dealt with that, there is no literary text which says that having arrived at either Pakistan or India, they have arrived at a certain kind of home. Indeed, one of the subtext of my book called Partition Dialogues is memories of a lost home. So one needs to think about the fact that almost every migrant thought that the home was one they had left behind. Of course, now, 60 odd years later, we have to think about home where we are at. That's a different issue. But thinking about the partition, there is not a single text that I know of in which the idea of a migration has been applauded as a necessary move towards something called home, where I can finally feel comfortable and get my being. There is not a single text in which any migrant feels that he or she has arrived also at a place of religious communality. That is also not the case. There is no text which says that. Nobody goes to masjids, nobody goes to temples, nobody goes to gurudwaras to give thanks to their various gods for having relieved them from the kafirs of different kinds. That is not the case. So having done that, it's self-evident that at least for the literary mind, the partition and the entire notion of two-nation theory is literally, I would continue to use the strong word, an absurdity. We can talk about this later.
And perhaps Mr. Asif Noorani, with his familiarity with these figures, would recall a speech made by Sarat Chandra Chatterjee, given by Prasad Chatterjee in 1926 about Hindu-Muslim relations. Now you can say whatever you want. You have a book called A Tale of Two Cities, which you co-authored.
Tales of Two Cities, sir.
Yes, we are in the
Thank
Charles
you.
Dickens bicentennial, so I took the
Thank you very much. Well, when I look back, when I was a student, which was not a very long time ago, but at that time, it was absolutely sacrilegious to have spoken against partition here, and you would have been lynched if you had spoken कि भाई ये गलत हुआ. This is not my cell phone. Anyway, so likewise in India, a Jaswant Singh would not have written a book about Mr. Jinnah and shed some light on him, and Mr. Advani would not have called him a secular person. So we have seen a world of change, and it's a good change, it's a happy change. Well, I have had the privilege of still wearing kurta and pajama, so when I go to India, they think I'm one of them. Yes, I'm one of them in many ways. They say, we are the same people. I said, we are similar people. We were the same people once upon a time, but we are different now. And let me tell you one incident. We went to Penang Film Festival, where there were 11 Indians and 2 Pakistanis. दो ही काफी थे वैसे, but anyway, there was one, my friend Satish Anand said that I was the leader of the team, and I said he was the leader of the team. Anyway, we were 2 there, and the Indian delegation was led by a thorough gentleman called Sunil Dutt. He was a very fine person. So as it happened, in the next 2 or 3 hours, we found that the South Indians were sitting in one side, and the North Indians and the Pakistanis were sitting on the other side. And most of the North Indians and Sunil and Satish Anand were speaking in Punjabi. I tried to do that, but failed miserably, as I have been failed in many other things in life. So what happened was that there was a French journalist. She came there and she said, I can't understand. You people are exchanging fire on Kashmir border or at the LOC, and here you are being very friendly. So Dutt Saab said, we can't understand also, so please don't tax your brain. So then I said, Dutt Saab, वो वहाँ बैठे हैं, आप यहाँ बैठे हैं, लकीर तो लगनी थी, लेकिन शायद गलत लग गई. So, I mean, I come across people in India and Pakistan who are not concerned कि क्यों बना, क्यों नहीं बना, वहाँ दाल क्या दाम की है, वहाँ प्याज क्या दाम की है. That is the common people thing. We can remain 2 nations. We can remain 2 countries. Forget what happened. We have to recognize Israel. Indians have to recognize Pakistan. They sometimes say कि हम फिर एक हो जाएंगे. So let's be very honest about it. And on a personal note, I may add, I have consumed 4.5 minutes. So half minute, I think personally I've benefited immensely from partition. If partition would not have taken place, my wife, whose family were living in Meerut, would have remained there, and she would have got married. She would have had the misfortune of getting married to a Meeruthi, and I would have remained in Bombay and maybe got married to a starlet in Bollywood who would have, at the first available opportunity, asked for a divorce. Thank you very much.
There's a little bit of diverse in our discussion also. So I think we better lay aside the second question and go ahead and ask about the process in which we can reverse the marginalization of the Pakistani Hindu, because the marginalization has taken place.
Well, Sindh, of course, I am from Sindh, and in Sindh, I said I'm from Sindh, and in Sindh there's the biggest but biggest number of Hindus and minorities. I think in the Punjab perhaps there are a lot of Christians, but in more Hindus in Sindh than I think in any other province. And as far as the rural part of Sindh is concerned, I don't think there's any marginalization as such. There are, of course, the Hindus are well settled, they are in trade, they are well off, they have lived there as they have lived for centuries.
Occasionally kidnapped also. Occasionally kidnapped also.
No, that's what I was just going to. That's the law and order situation. The law and order situation of the country, of course, has made them targets for dacoits and so on, because they are seen as a prosperous section of the community who has they're more to rob than in other communities, so they are a target for that kind of thing. As far as the whole of Pakistan is concerned, of course there's marginalization, because there are stories of how they're discriminated against for government jobs or for jobs generally, even in the private sector. There is I think a general sort of perhaps division or something there, but I'm myself not really, I can't really offer you a definite opinion on what sort of marginalization, unless I've got. Mahesh, can you say something about marginalization?
Well.
I think it's worth remembering, when we look back at 1947, how diverse the populations were of both the areas that made up Pakistan and India, but also the lack of clarity about citizenship rights and about who was a rightful citizen of both countries at the time during the process of formation of the two states, and the confusions around that. I mean, not many people remember that there was a Dalit in the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan initially, Mandal, and there were many Indian Muslims, of course, who weren't clear about which side of the border they were to stay on, or where their rights would be protected, or where they would be safe. And in Sindh, as my colleague in London, Sarah Ansari, has written about in great detail, there was a lot of efforts to keep communities, Hindu and other communities in Karachi and in Sindh, in order to protect just banking and infrastructure, because these things were under collapse in 1947 because of the departure of certain skilled people who couldn't easily be just automatically replaced by incoming groups. And similarly, in India, Nehru went to great lengths to try and keep India as a multicultural and plural society, particularly for the Muslims in UP. I think he made a great difference there, where there were so many differences politically with the regional administration. So I think, as for the present day, I don't really want to comment much, apart from to say that I think legal rights make a difference on the ground for people, and also a sense of citizenship and a sense of belonging is something that both countries have had to build and grow since independence, in order to make everybody feel that they have a stake in a nation, and that they have that their rights are going to be protected, and also that they are the natural citizens of the country, that they're not second-tier citizens. And I think there are issues around sovereignty in both states, where different groups have not had that ability to feel integrated and fully first-class members, if you like.
Dr. Duffy.
I would say that it is not only the Hindus of Pakistan who are marginalized. There are other communities also who are marginalized. And within the 97% Muslims, they are marginalized groups in Pakistan. The reason being the state of Pakistan has taken upon itself the responsibility of a religious project. And I would say that nowhere in the modern world this is the responsibility of the state to project one particular religion. So I would say that the first thing we need to do is to declare Pakistan a secular state. Unless we do that, mere patchworks and mere changing certain clauses with certain other clauses that won't do any good. We need a total transformation of the society, a total transformation of our mindset, and we should accept that Pakistan is a diverse society, and we should respect the diversities. We should rejoice in being a diverse society. Thank you.
Well, it's not for me to comment on the Hindus of Pakistan. I don't know very much about them. But as a general principle, I think any time we play identity politics, it doesn't matter what it is and where it is. We play that in India also. We are bound to end up in potentially genocidal situations. This is bound to happen. I think any time identity politics is played, the result and the consequences of it are disastrous. I'm glad to hear that. I was not going to say this here, sitting in Karachi. I would have thought it a violation of hospitality to say that Pakistan must become a secular state. But of course, all states should become secular states. All states all states should have equal rights, not only for citizenship, but all people in any state should begin to feel that they are at home wherever they live, with their neighbors, and they should not have to choose the religions of their neighbors. If the moment they have to choose the religions of their neighbors, that very moment we have bad societies. So if Pakistan has problems with its minorities, we have problems with minorities also, which we haven't been able to solve. The only difference, I would say, is that in India at least, I can say with some confidence here, that every time we misbehave, there are also tremendous voices of protest against it. And that, again, is a saving grace in some ways. And I hope that the voices of protest in Pakistan also become louder and louder, so that eventually the borders between the two nations dissolve. Thank you.
Mr. Asif Turani.
Well, I think the minority has suffered and will suffer irrespective of partition. The carnage of 6 after Mrs. Gandhi's assassination, the carnage of Muslims in Ahmedabad, thanks to Mr. Modi, Narendra Modi, it was because of that the BJP lost the elections, and the occasional anti-Ahmadi riots. They prove that partition or no partition, the minority will continue to suffer. And I stick to my point, we should remain as the best of neighbors. And maybe at some point of time, when there is a need for dissolving the partition, the line that demarcates us, that's why it's not so easy. It will create fresh problems. And finally, as a student of literature who feels privileged sitting next to a literary critic, I have to raise one point, that all the writings which sided with one particular community is now totally forgotten. What we remember are the writings of Ramanand Sagar, Krishan Chandra, is Intezar Hussain. I wish he had been here somewhere. He's here.
He is here.
Oh, so which shows that I didn't say this to please him anyway. So, and more than anybody, Saadat Hasan Manto are remembered because they didn't take sides. Khushwant Singh, another big name. Bapsi Sidhwa. So, whether we remain separate nations, so we remain we become one country. First, let us make our minorities happy and then talk of becoming one. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think I've said somewhere that every majority wants an ideological state and every minority wants a secular state. In one way or the other, in some place or the other, we are all minorities. So I think it's only Dr. Jafar Ahmed who has answered the question and hit the thing on the nails. There is marginalization, although Dr. Crow is talking about the affluence of the Hindu society. Dr. Justice Ghaus Muhammad brought in a writ petition against the appointment of Justice Bhagwan Das as the Chief Justice of Pakistan. So how can we say there is no marginalization? Again, I am also honored as a very, very insignificant literary critic to be here in the presence of Dr. Alok Valla. And although I am also the most prejudiced literary critic, if you don't believe me, you can ask our Intezar Hussain Saab. He'll say yes, I am very prejudiced. But one thing that literary critics are attacked for and historians are attacked for are to sort of explain away texts. You see, I don't think that the four quotations I brought up from Mahatma Gandhi, from Allama Iqbal, from, well, Jinnah, that's always bandied about, or even Pandit Nehru in the context of Bengal, is known to people, and that is something we write books, we tell lies in books. I've been asked to tell lies in books. Dr. Jafar knows that. But I think we should look back, not with regret, but with a purpose to make the future more secure, more happy for all the people who had been combatants. And it's a very wrong thing that we say nationalism and all. Europeans say, Europe has set an example by the EU. Europe has made the German-French rivalry irrelevant. If we go in the right direction, then we will not need to have debates like this.
Excuse me, floor open kari, time.
Yes, I think. Now any, yes.
Yeah. See, Dr. Saab, you've been talking about.
But please make sure that these are questions, not comments.
We don't have time
We don't have time to hear long comments.
That's a very small question. You have talked about the marginalization of Hindus, but you haven't talked about marginalization of other communities. Ahmadis are being discriminated against. Now, today, the newspaper in Tribune, there has been a small news item. So-called educated lawyers, they have passed a resolution in Lahore Bar High Court Association to boycott Shizan, which has been providing, these snacks and cold drinks in all the down the line judiciary in the Punjab. Then we are discriminating against other communities also. So one has to take the broader perspective view, broader view, that we have to treat all the minorities on equal footing.
It was not a question, sir.
Well, it wasn't a question, but he is saying that why I didn't include the Ahmadis or anything. No, what I am saying, let me have one word if you may allow. We must correct our behavior. We must not give any section of society, I repeat, any cause of complaint. We did not part to create religious discrimination we had hoped. It was a false hope.
Yes.
We had hoped to end religious discrimination. Thank you. Any other question?
I request the audience to please form and frame proper questions and refrain from making statements.
My name is Tahasha. I'm a student. I just have, well, any amount of time is very little to debate an issue of this sort. But how can we not look back at the partition with regret? I mean, after 1,000 years of peaceful coexistence, saying that two societies which literally were over 1,000 years had a similar culture which were brought up together, very different, is just absurd completely. And my question now is, how would the panel here think that Jinnah is any different from the RSS? Or Narendra Modi, for that matter, in Gujarat, in terms of inciting communalism and hence violence, and hence, how would you rate Jinnah any different?
I think it's very unfair. I think it's very unfair comparing Jinnah with Narendra Modi. There's no comparison. He has never ordered any carnage. And you may disagree with him. I disagree with him. But there can be no comparison between the two. What do we have to say? No comparison.
I think what's getting conflated sometimes when we look back at partition is the demand for a separate country, which was the demand for Pakistan, and the political leadership wanting Pakistan, and the people who wanted Pakistan. Many people did want Pakistan, but it was an idea, it was a belief, it was a dream. And then there was the partition and the carnage that happened and the things that happened at that time. And I don't think the two are necessarily the same, and they actually become conflated sometimes in our thinking, and certainly from the other side of the border, I think the two have become completely conflated. And I think actually there were people who were responsible for violence at all levels of society, and also in all political parties, and I think it didn't really come from the top, but at lower level cadres and in the intermediate layers there were people who were involved in violence, and that is something, there were victims on every side, but also people who were involved in that. But I think that has to be contextualized within the great fear, insecurity and anxieties of the time that took place.
There's this lady who has a question, please.
May I interject?
इसके बाद बाबर after that. जी, ladies first. जी, please. But he's my neighbor, so he should not be forgotten.
Well, I think that there was no communal problem for 1,000 years in India because Muslims were in power. We should not. That's. You see, because if you look at the Muslim psyche, and the whole the politics in India.
Well, that's a comment, miss.
Okay,
please ask a question.
My question is, what viable alternative do you suggest to partition? To the Muslim problem in India, what other option do you have in mind? The cabinet mission plan failed. So what other option do you have in mind? Or what other option was there? Was there any option? That's my question.
Hamida?
There was no option on the table certainly at that time, apart from when the cabinet mission plan had been accepted and was satisfactory as far as Jinnah, Muslim League, or even most of the interim cabinet was concerned. But it failed, as I explained earlier, because Nehru didn't want to have be restricted by any constitution. He said we'll be free to decide our own opinion. And his deepest concern was the controls of the center and the economy. So he turned that down. But obviously at that time, then Muslim League took up the whole question of Pakistan with great fervor after that. And once the Calcutta killings and so on had happened, it was very difficult to get back to the atmosphere where, and also I have to say, and this has not been said so often, is that Mountbatten, I think, was greatly responsible for the situation.
I think that's just time for last question, Babar, because the next people from there.
Please give the mic to Mr. Babar and ask.
I had a question for Dr. Yasmin Khan. If I understood correctly, it was mentioned that there wasn't any mass movement of people planned, and then the conclusion was that therefore the partition wasn't driven by a strong sense of nationalism. But isn't that a very limiting lens or an analysis to draw such a big conclusion from?
Well, I don't think the movement of 12 million people is a limited analysis. I mean, I think that's a very major fact of historical major historical event which had massive consequences for the reconstitution of the areas that then became Pakistan and North India. And I think that those unintended migrations and the violence that accompanied them changed the actual states that came into existence, and they changed the places that then became Pakistan and North India. I think they had massive consequences, of course.
Okay.
Actually, I would just like to rephrase the question my young friend had put in, and that is that doing communal politics by Jinnah is also similar to doing communal politics by BJP or anybody else. So at certain level there is a parallel, and that's what I want to comment on.
Mr. Ayaz, you're my elder brother, because you're a friend of my elder brother.
But why I brought this text is exactly to show that it was not Jinnah who started as a communalist, and he was not an egoist. He said that I learned politics at the feet of Sir Surendranath Banerjee. Do you imagine any other leader of the Indian freedom movement being so free of self-importance?
Thank you.
Thank you. We have another session. And young man, come here.
मारिएगा नहीं उसको.
It's almost impossible to talk about
Yes, because this is not fair.
No.
We should have been allowed our
Yeah, I think so. There was not enough time. Yeah, he dominated it. And also